everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. I am splitting this wrap up into 2 videos because it's the holidays and I read a lot of books and I had a particular theme going, which no one is surprised that I read a lot of hockey romances this week, so I'm actually going to split this. And this video is going to be everything that I read that was not a hockey romance this week, and it's still a list. But later in the week, I'm going to share the hockey romances that I have read. And I figured that was a good way to break it up because then I get a themed wrap up out of it as well. And it also means that this video is not going to be 30 minutes long, which you guys may not mind watching, but it is a pain to edit. So we're going to try and keep this as simple and as pain-free as possible. Okie dokie, we are going to kick it off with some kids titles, including one that I did receive for release. I completely forgot to talk about this in last week's wrap up, so I'm including it in this one. It is Huda Was Here by H. Hayek, which came out a couple of weeks ago. This is an Australian middle grade title. It is fantastic. It follows on from Huda and Me, which I did review here, and I received this as a review copy from Ilona Andrews. This is about Huda and Akil, whose father has worked as the body corporate's security guard for where they live for a little while, but he loses his job when crime goes down in their suburb. This is obviously a very stressful time for their family and it puts a financial burden on the family, which the kids are observing occurs through changes in the food that they have and whatnot. And eventually their dad does get another job, but it's in a different state all the way on the other side of the country. Obviously, Huda and Akil are not particularly happy about this, and Huda in particular comes up with a plan to force the community to hire their father back by causing small acts of vandalism around town and getting up to mischief. It's a really fun, very entertaining story. There is really close family bonds. We also get to see and spend more time with other members of Huda and Akil's family, as well as members of their community. And it's a great little book for talking about actions and consequences. So thank you very much again to Ilona Andrews for sending this to me. I do have a full video review on this particular book over on my kids channel, but I really love this story. Also from Ilona Andrews, I read a young adult title called Hunger of Thorns by Lily Wilkinson. This is actually coming out on the 18th. It is a really fantastic young adult fantasy story. It is written by an Australian and it feels like a YA fantasy, which is amazing because that's the kind of fantasy that I like to read. So I was very excited when I read this. It is kind of a dark fairy tale. It's about Maud, who has grown up in a magical family, but in a world where magic is very tightly controlled by men who have no magic. Anything here sounding familiar. But when she was a young teen, Maud lost her magic, and really the only thing she has left is this ability to tell fantastic stories. She is also estranged from her best friend from childhood and hasn't really spoken to her in the last couple of years, but in the last 2 weeks her best friend Odette has gone missing, and the only clue is that she might have gone into Sicklehurst, which is an abandoned power plant that nobody in town seems to remember. Obviously Maud goes after her, and what she discovers there is a hidden magic that has sinister leanings. There are monsters, there's a feral girl gang, which is amazing. There is the rediscovery of magic and lots of really cool, creepy little scenes and very thought-provoking things that I absolutely loved. And the best thing, it's a standalone. It's a standalone young adult fantasy romance. And I forgot to say there is sapphic longing in here. So Maud's grandparents are both women who have been in a committed relationship. Maud herself has this longing for her best friend, and the whole thing is just delightful. It's so well written, it was so entertaining, and if you like your fantasy romance with, you know, sort of dark forbidden magic, this is definitely one to check out. I will also have a completely separate review for that up on Little Bookish Teacher as well. This week I also did my reread of Sweep of the Blade by Ilona Andrews. This is book 4 in the Innkeeper Chronicles series, and oh my gosh, I love this book even more than I did the first time. In fact, when I first read the series, this was the very first book in the series that I gave 5 stars, which has since been bumped up to 6 stars because I love this book so much. It is definitely more sci-fi than urban fantasy than the previous one because Maud, who is the sister of Dina the innkeeper from the first 3 books, is traveling through space to visit the home planet of Ireland, who is a space vampire and a delight of character. I mean, I love all of the characters in this series, but he's always been a favourite character of mine, and this is their romance, which is very slow burn. So worth it, but incredibly slow burn. Maud is a single mum. She had previously been married to a vampire, and her husband was killed because he did some very shady things and got what he deserved, but it meant that Maud has had to raise Helen, her daughter, on a very dangerous planet on her own. And Maud is a human, but she is a human with magic, and she is more than up to the task of standing up to the vampires. In fact, she has so much vampire political knowledge and history in her head that she goes toe-to-toe with people who are trying to catch her out and are trying to provoke her, and she just does not let that happen. She's one of my favorite heroines because she's so strong, so determined, and she's trying to figure out whether or not she can commit to being in another relationship with a vampire when the last one went so badly wrong. Helen is an utter delight. Seeing the vampire politics firsthand, like with all vampire characters, was really fun because my gosh, these people do not let up. We also get to see the merchant clan again, who pop up in all of these books, as well as meeting another alien clan, the Taki, who were just delightful, and I just thoroughly enjoyed being in this world. And hands down, I would read more books set amongst the vampires because these are vampires like you have not seen before. And I laughed so hard so many times in the story. I'm currently in the middle of rereading it with the graphic audio, which is also fantastic, and I'll probably do another reread of that before the live show, which is at the end of the month. I love this book so much. Like, I love Dina and Sean, but I also love this one. And it almost feels like its own story. Like, it has ties to the first 3 books through the characters, but this feels like its own entity, and I deeply appreciate that. Okay, I also read a novella called The Art Collector by Caitlin Brem. This novella features a 40-plus heroine, I think. Her name's Madeline. She works for an insurance company, and she's sent out to appraise the paintings that are hanging in a sort of infamous mansion in town. And there she meets Thomas Van Dries, who is very charming, very attractive. He's from overseas, and he may or may not be a demon. And the longer that Madeline spends looking through his art collection and making her notes and learning more about the mansion's history and his mother who lived there, Madeline begins to suspect that things are not quite what they seem. This was just utterly delightful, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a very quick read, but it was just a really fun, entertaining demon read, and I'm so glad that I stumbled across it. I also read Sand and Secrets by Cadence Snow. This is while I was going through books that I have by rare authors. Cadence Snow is an Australian author, and this is a novella-length story. It's kind of a romantic suspense about a young woman whose brother has gone missing, and she is in a small seaside town, which was his last known location, trying to track him down. She's living rough because she's trying to stay off the grid and not alert her parents to where she is, and she ends up meeting Riley, who is a local, and he is attracted to her and sort of takes her under his wing, and they begin to get to know one another and start a relationship until she learns that he may have a connection to her brother's disappearance. And while I probably would have liked the story to be fleshed out a little bit more, it was still an enjoyable read set in a seaside town, and it was just a fun holiday story. I also finally picked up The Quarterback by Tal Bauer. This is the second book in one of his sports romance series. So the previous one was The Jock? Yes, The Jock. I just saw it on the shelf. This is the best friend of the hero from the first book. Colton is the quarterback for the local college team, and at the very end of the season he is injured and he's basically wiped out for the entire final season of his college career. When his best friend and his best friend's boyfriend go away for the summer, Colton is kind of left on his own, but he ends up spending time with his friend's dad, whose name is Nick. We met him in the first book, and Nick has recently separated from his wife and has moved to town to be closer to his son and has sort of become part of their group. All 4 of them get along really great. And when Colton is injured, Nick begins to keep him company because he's got a little bit more flexibility, and once the best friends go away, Nick is the only one around. And Nick also offers Colton an internship that he needs to be able to complete his final year of his degree. And so there's a lot of forced proximity. They end up spending a lot of time together and falling in love without realizing that that's what they're doing. And there is a bit of drama in this one and whatnot, but it was very sweet, and it was interesting to see how they felt for one another and how they acknowledged it and how they were afraid to acknowledge it to other people, but also afraid to not be together. I really enjoyed it. It's Tal Bauer. I was always going to enjoy it, and I really liked reading about Colton in the first book, so it was good to see his story. I also read Joran by Susan Hayes, which is a sci-fi romance by an author attending Rare. This one is supposed to be mail order bride, but to be perfectly honest, I read it and I'm like, this is kind of like an alien kidnapping a human for married kind of story, not necessarily mail order bride, because mail order bride suggests that there is something vaguely consensual in the initial sense of the process. This is a very short and to the point alien romance story. If you've read one alien mail order bride story, you've kind of read most of them, that you just change up the names and some of the things that happen in the story. Essentially, Joran is the crown prince of an alien planet that has very few women, and in order to prevent their race from dying out, they've decided that Earth women are compatible, and so the rich and powerful, which is a source of conflict in this story, are allowed to go to Earth and see if they can find their bride through a dating app. That's pretty much what there is to the story. I also read If Only You by Chloe Liese, which is one of my most anticipated books of the year because this is the 6th book in the Bergman brothers and sisters series. So this one is about one of the sisters, Ziggy, who is the youngest of the Bergman family, and she is autistic. She plays soccer, and everyone is constantly underestimating her because she is the baby of the family and she kind of hates that reputation. And she decides that she has the opportunity to rough up her image a little bit by proposing a fake friendship with her brother's best friend, Sebastian, who is going through a bit of a low point in his career. Frankie, who's his agent, basically tells him that his reputation needs a resurrection because that's how far he's sunk. And initially Sebastian is kind of resistant to this fake friendship with Ziggy, but they actually genuinely enjoy spending time with one another and verbally sparring with one another. Throughout the course of the story, Sebastian learns that he has celiac disease, and so he's learning how to deal and manage that, and Ziggy helps him with it. She also reveals to him that she's autistic, which he didn't realize, and the two find a lot of common ground, and there's a lot of interference by the Bergman siblings because of course they're adorable and well-meaning and often in your face. And Ziggy spends a lot of the book proving to her family that she's an adult. She has grown up a lot because forget how old she was in the very first book of the series, but she was quite young. But now she's 22 and she's making her way through the world. She is a star soccer player. Sebastian is a star hockey player, and the two are finding out how to mix their worlds together. And I just adored them. They were great. It was a really fun read. There's plenty of mutual pining that happens in the story, and seeing the way both these characters grow as they learn from each other and realize that this friendship that they've got is actually a relationship, a beginning relationship, is really lovely. But it is super slow burn. Like, it's so slow burn. They don't get together officially until the very end of the book. So be aware of that, but it is so worth it. Like, I just had the most joyful time reading the book. And then finally this weekend I read Something Spectacular by Alexis Hall, which is Alexis Hall's new book. This is the follow-up to Something Fabulous, and we're following Peggy, who is the best friend of Bella Tartleton, and Peggy has been in love with Bella for the longest time, but Arabella does not really return her feelings. And in fact, we know that Arabella is coded as a romantic, but Arabella doesn't understand that. She's trying to find love but thinks that she's broken. And that's a part of her story that we see sort of playing out in the background of this story. Bella and her brother Bonnie, who is the hero of the first book, love to dramatize everything that's happening in their lives. And so because Bella is feeling like she is not finding love, she ropes Peggy into a scheme to match her up with a soprano singer, Orfeo, who's in town and performing for some of the local rich aristocratic families. But unexpectedly, Peggy begins to fall for Orfeo and is drawn into their world, and their world is just larger than life and challenges gender stereotypes and gender norms, and Peggy herself challenges gender stereotypes and gender norms. And the way that these two navigate an attraction to an actual proper, fully fleshed out relationship, because initially their relationship has an expiry date, and what that looks like for them in a society that does not know what to do with them was just fantastic. I was buddy reading it with Brie. I love talking about Alexis Hall's books with her. There is so much humor in this book. I did kind of want to strangle Bonnie and Bella because they are just so self-absorbed. They mean well, but they're very self-absorbed, and they do turn everything into a massive story. And in fact, one of my favorite lines from the very end of the book, and this is from Bonnie, it says, "Oh my God, you people have no emotional stamina. You'd never survive in a novel," because that's the way that he views the world. But the whole thing was just so fun, so entertaining, and full of really interesting characters, and it was very enjoyable. All right, so those are all the books that I have read in the last week that are not hockey romances. I mean, technically If Only You is, but it's enough of a not that I wanted to put it in this video. If you've read any of these books or you're planning on picking them up, feel free to let me know down below, or share something that you have been reading and loving this week. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a painting emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.